Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very special session on the media as a religion. We've heard several times during this session, during this conference, that one of the legacies of Václav Havel has been words. Words are in the hands of a poet, a playwright, and an author, not merely letters scrambled together. They are a precious, very precious commodity. They are not scattered helter-skelter, but rather they are treated, words are, with respect and even with consummate veneration. They are planted carefully, precisely, because there is the possibility always that words are pregnant with meaning that expresses more than the simple word could say. And once they do that, they take on a life of their own. And the legacy of Havel is that his words have done precisely that. We have 4 words that we're discussing today. Media as a religion. And I am asking these very 5 distinguished, but also exciting and intriguing panelists to explore media as a religion and to discuss precisely that. We're beginning with a mini keynote. And the mini keynote is being delivered by Professor Thomas Halík. So let me introduce him to you, and I will introduce each of the panelists in turn so that you can sort of keep them straight, because they have very lengthy biographies and very intriguing biographies. Thomas Halík, to my right, someone many of you know, in 1978 was secretly ordained a Roman Catholic priest in Erfurt, Germany. He was investigated by and registered as an enemy of the communist regime, officially, which is, in a way, a badge of honor. He is superbly credentialed with a lengthy list of degrees and postgraduate studies, but there's one that deserves special mention. In the year 2002, he participated in an Antarctic expedition to research survival in conditions of extreme mental and physical stress. I think you should write a book about this. It should be a bestseller. Thomas Halík lectures globally. There's not a continent he hasn't visited in the last 2 years, but his home base is Charles University, where his competencies in philosophy, psychology, sociology of religion, relationship of religion and culture, and the role of religion in modern culture are just part of his teaching repertoire. He is also, in his spare time, rector of the Church of the Savior, the church at the Charles Bridge. And I was talking about this earlier in the car as we were driving over, and my assistant said that his fiancée was there for the Eucharistic liturgy a few weeks ago, and the place was packed with students on the rafters. And that was precisely my experience when I also was present with Thomas Halík presiding at the Church of the Savior. He has 200 publications to his credit, with 2 books published by Doubleday in New York City. They are prominently displayed in bookstores all over the United States, and I dare say they are also prominently read. Of particular note today, given our commemoration of the presence and absence of Václav Havel, is that in 1998, Václav Havel indicated in the Czech media that Thomas Halík would be an able and excellent successor to Havel as Czech president. So we have here someone who could have been with that kind of an endorsement. Dr. Halík obviously declined and remains in the active priesthood as an active academic, as a very active writer, and is with us today to present a mini keynote addressing the theme of this session, Media as a Religion. I ask you to welcome Professor Halík.
Thank you, Doris. Media as a religion. It is really not easy to speak about religion. There are a few phenomena that have so many different forms and so many dimensions, even fewer whose role has to change so radically in the course of history and in different cultural and political contexts. When we speak of religion, do we mean the institution or doctrine, spirituality or morality, a public ritual or private piety, a system of law or the practice of charity? The concept that religion can be considered as a general category, one that includes a variety of spiritual cultures ranging from Western Christianity to Buddhism and Hinduism to the religions of African tribes and Australian Aborigines, is a relatively modern one. It originated amongst Cambridge scholars in the 17th century, so-called Cambridge Platonics, the Anglican Enlightenment theologians. I can think of many arguments against this concept. I would like, therefore, to return to the origins of the word religio, from which, in most Western languages, the word for religion is derived, with the Czech language as one exception. In non-Western cultures and languages, there is no precise equivalent for this term, religion. The word religio was first used in ancient Rome. The ancient concept of religio as a collection of state-sanctioned symbols and rituals has much in common with the modern concept of civil religion. Essentially, it is a matter of ritual contact with the sacred foundations of society, the symbolic expression of a common identity of what holds society together. On one of the important role of religion, defined in the sense of religio, it is integrative role, as used in the sense we can say that what integrates a society and holds it together is its religion. I'm not saying that religion is what integrates society, but what integrates a society is its religion in this sense. Of course, I'm speaking now about one of the social roles of religion. I'm not talking about faith, piety, spirituality, ethics, etc. It took several centuries before Christianity was which originally had a quite different form. It truly was a path, way, life orientation following Jesus Christ, assumed the form of a religion in the ancient sense and played the political role not only in Rome after Constantine, but practically throughout the Middle Ages. I'm often asked whether contemporary Europe is unchristian or non-religious. My answer is, Europe is not simply unchristian or non-religious, but nor is it religious in a Christian way. Christianity is not the religion of present-day Europe, and European Christianity is no longer a religion. In my opinion, the main power of religion, in the sense of religio, resides in its ability to be the common language of a given civilization. On the threshold of the modern age, traditional Christianity, the Christian theology, Christian doctrine, began to lose that role, and in a certain sense, science was to become the religio of the West. Christianity was assigned the status of a philosophy of life, Weltanschauung, and gradually came to be regarded as another ideology. However, in the course of the 20th century, modern science became so complex that it lost the ability to be the common language of Western civilization. It is my feeling that in modern Western society, the social role of religion as religio is most likely played by the mass media. They increasingly influence ways of thinking and behavior, mediating symbols and stories, and creating a network among people. For many, they are the arbiters of truth. What is real and of importance is what can be seen on the television news, and is in the prime time the first from the news. The mass media offer interpretation of the world and put the different sectors of life together. What we know about politics, cultural events, sport, progress in science, etc., do we know mainly through the media. We can also say that what plays a major integrative role in today's Western society is a capitalist economy, a market that adapts Western monotheism into moneytheism. However, the media are an important part of this system. They represent a market with a very important goods, with information. After September 11, Richard Dawkins, as could be expected, accused religion of being a primary tool, if not the primary cause, of terrorism. It is possible to argue that a much more dangerous tool of terrorism is the media. The main concern of terrorists is not the actual killing of people. The main concern is to get the images of this killing onto television screens across the globe. The main concern of September 11 terrorists was not to destroy the twins, nor the conquest of the Pentagon, but the conquest of the screen. The strength of terrorism is in its media acknowledgement. That is what creates terror horror. Without the media images, terrorists would be unarmed, hopeless. Media, if they are to fulfill their role as information resources, cannot admit this intention of the terrorist. In this respect, they are powerless. However, the media are not simply a passive mirror of reality. They are also its interpreters, and thereby also its co creators. The real is what works. Wirklichkeit ist, was es wirkt, Carl Gustav Jung wrote. He wrote it concerning a religious image of the world. But this also applies to the media image of the world. My generation still has strong memories of state television and radio as instruments of political propaganda under communist regime, when the communist ideology had an absolute monopoly of the media. In the underground and culture dissent, including an underground church, we tried to disrupt this monopoly of information and ideological manipulation and to offer alternatives. Today, we are certainly grateful for the freedom and pluralism of the media. However, it is not possible to fail to notice the fact that even in a society without an ideology dictated by state power and controlled by censors, the proverbial free hand of the market is not an automatic guarantee of quality. Some commentators have suggested that the so-called Muslim terrorists were more inspired by the thrillers and horrors and action films produced for Western television than by the Quran. I have talked about how media has, in many aspects, taken over the integrative and interpretative role played by traditional religions. Perhaps this fact presents a challenge for the traditional religion to adopt more the role of an ethical and moral resource. And there is also one more task that remains. The media constitutes one aspect of the technical world. Technology, Martin Heidegger wrote, has surpassed all distances, but has not created any proximity. Maybe people of faith and the community of faith should feel an even greater responsibility for creating a culture of proximity.
Mm.
Very nice.
Well, I think we're off to a good start. Thank you so much for providing a challenge to conventional, traditional religions, and we'll see what our panelists have to say about this. Let me tell you what our agenda is. We're going to ask each of the panelists to respond for 3 to 5 minutes, and then to engage in a conversation among themselves before we turn it over to you to ask the questions that you have. Our first respondent, Roger Scruton, to my left here, if there is anybody here who hasn't met him yet. When I first learned that I would be introducing Roger Scruton on this panel, my first thought was that I would take the opportunity to catch up on his writing. I was aware that he was a prolific writer. I was not quite aware that he has 40 books to his credit. So unfortunately, I didn't have the 5 years necessary to read them all, but this was my strategy. I began with articles and posts in various publications, but in particular in The Guardian. And these were some of my favorites. So I give you their titles, and you'll get an idea of the range of this man. Made in Heaven, Curiouser and Curiouser, Translating the Word, Politics as a Profession, On Defending Beauty, a specialty of Dr. Scruton, Gratitude and Grace, Music and Morality, Facing Torture, Art, Beauty, and Judgment, and The Decline of Laughter. Then my next strategy was to load the Gifford lectures titled The Face of God on my Kindle for the trip over to 4M 2000. I thought it was interesting last night that Paul Wilson mentioned that the first magazine, was it, that Václav Havel published was called Tvář, Face. So we have the face of God as the theme of the Gifford lectures with Roger Scruton. I was dazzled especially by the index of names. Do you do that? Do you get a book that you want to read and you look in the back and you see who is being quoted in the book? So I give you just a mini list from the names under the letter B, once again to indicate the range of what has to be a Renaissance mind. Karl Barth, Ludwig van Beethoven, Max Bennett, Nikolai Berdyaev, Sir Isaiah Berlin, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, Alain Bessacon, Ernst Bloch, Sandro Botticelli, Benjamin Britten, Martin Buber, Joseph Buckley. Isn't that enticing? Do you want to read the book? And then I peeked over at the T's. I also read the book. Quentin Tarantino, a violent filmmaker, maybe not only that, but that, followed by Teresa of Avila, followed by Therese of Lisieux, followed under the T's by Henry David Thoreau. Roger Scruton has written a book, this book, that takes account of the need for both poetry and prose to expose us to the sacred, where, if our sensibilities will allow, we glimpse the oneness of the cosmos, which may open for us the possibility of God. All of this, by the by, is not available to the one doomed by the language of objectivity, for there is no comprehension, no beholding of the other to that person. This is a rich theology combined with rich human experience that makes one want to register at the seat of the foot of one who has traveled the path to secrets that only one who loves the world knows. It's my pleasure to present to you Professor Roger Scruton.
Well, thank you, Doris. That's the kindest introduction I've ever achieved. I don't know what I did to deserve it. I suppose the fact that you don't know me must help. Anyway, my role here is just to respond in 3 minutes to the very rich presentation from Tomáš Halík, with the outlines of which I agree. I think in the sense of religion, in which it means what the Romans called religio, the media have become our religion. That's to say, they are the principal integrating force in a modern society. And Tomáš has made a very powerful case for thinking that. But as he says, religion is more than just that. It's more than what the Romans called religio. And it's worth remembering that in Roman religion, the state, although requiring religious observance, was more or less completely indifferent as to what people, in fact, worshipped. There were a whole variety of gods available on the Roman supermarket shelf, and you picked one that looked pretty to you, and you went away and worshipped it. And as long as you did this with what the Romans called pietas, as I say, due submission, due sense that you were a weak and created and useless being, that was fine, because that meant that you were also a submissive citizen. And in a way, that's what our modern state attitude or political attitude to religion has become. It doesn't really matter what you worship, as long as it makes you into an obedient citizen. And if the thing that makes you into an obedient citizen is sitting at home watching pornography for 10 hours a day, fine. At least you're no trouble to anyone else. But real religion, as we have known it in our civilization, that's to say the Christian religion largely and its Judaic origins, has also had another meaning which has been very important in this part of the world. It's the meaning that was summarized by Plato in the phrase, the care of the soul. And of course, famously, Jan Patočka took that phrase and presented it to his underground seminar and to people like Tomáš Halík, I think, as embodying also the fundamental experience of the Czechs through the centuries. That here in the heart of Europe, you sense, as it were, the underlying spiritual need of the whole continent. And that spiritual need is not summarized simply by religio in the Roman sense. It is also a need to be at one with your own soul, and through that to be at one with God, let's say with the higher perspective of things, which is God's. And I think this need is very much there. It was something for which Václav Havel also in his way represented, although he was a typically skeptical modern person, as I think most people in this room probably are, and as indeed the Czech tradition in a way requires, he also made that space at the heart of things for something other than this manipulation of sentiment which goes on around us all the time. So one final, I know I'm only allowed 3.5 minutes, I've got 0.5 of a minute left. One last thought then is that perhaps if we see things from this perspective, we will see the media not as religion in the full sense that we know, but as a form of idolatry. As I say, creating images, objects of attention, which are manifestly human products, but pretending nevertheless to be divine. And this has always been recognized as a danger to the human soul, and it is. And I think we should be alert to this danger and recognize that we need something else. Thank you.
Well, we need to come back to some of this, don't we? We need to come back to the care of the soul, we need to come back to the spirituality, and we need to reinvestigate the idolatry issue, don't we? Didn't you say? Our next respondent, I am pleased to introduce, is Professor Surendra Munshi. He is seated 2 persons over to my right, in the middle over here, and he is currently a retired professor of sociology from the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, abbreviated IIMC. He has researched and taught in India and abroad, and has served for more than 30 years as a faculty member at the IIMC prior to his retirement in 2006. He has been the academic leader of an international project on good governance. Many of his writings are in this area of good governance that was supported by the European Commission, in which several European institutions of higher education, including LSE, the London School of Economics, took part. The book on good governance was followed by another book on the same theme called The Intelligent Person's Guide to Good Governance, published in 2009. Of particular interest is this fascinating area of research that has been Professor Munshi's interest in considering what valuable lessons can be learned from varied backgrounds on the issue of good governance. So predictably, he turned to 2 of his countrymen, Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. Dr. Munshi holds that Gandhi's role gives credence to some of the most innovative management ideas on leadership. Very interesting, wouldn't you say? And from Tagore, he has plumbed his distinction, Tagore's distinction, between the spirit of the West and the nation of the West. And he finds Tagore's argument in favor of going beyond nationalism and through cooperation between cultures for humanity to win back its lost human heritage. So we have a different angle, I suppose, to hear from Professor Munshi in his 3 to 5 minute response.
Thank you indeed for this very kind introduction. And I would say with Professor Scruton, you don't know me much. Now, coming to Professor Halík's presentation, I must say I agree with a lot of what you have said. And I would like to introduce Durkheim, the French sociologist, into the picture in support of the argument that you have given, saying that for Durkheim, religion is to be contrasted with private belief. It is something, as he said, eminently social. Beliefs and practices relating to the sacred belong to this domain. But for Durkheim, sacred is not limited to gods or spirits. A sacred thing can be a rock, a tree, a spring, a pebble, a piece of wood, a house. In a word, anything can be sacred that a community sets apart and respects as sacred. Now, if this is the definition that a leading sociologist provides of religion, then one can see that it basically connects something that Professor Halík also emphasized, religion as a connecting force, as a binding force, which is also true in the Western sense to the etymological root of the word religion, in the sense of binding. And if one thinks of other elements of religion apart from binding, one finds reverence for a higher power and the general mental and moral attitude resulting from it, devotion, charisma, and it is in this context usually forgotten that charisma word itself goes back to its religious origin. So if you consider religion in this sense, then it becomes possible to assert that media is becoming in important ways, at least in the Western world, a new religion. It connects, it creates a reverence and devotion, it creates charismatic persons. It is therefore not surprising that it is important for people to receive widespread media coverage. What he said, the screen space becomes very vital, and it is very important to become a media star. If Durkheim said that a rock could become sacred, we see that rock stars are sacred, set aside as sacred, made sacred by the media. And one can say in this respect that mass communication in today's world has become mass communion with its own ceremonies, modes of sharing or exchanging thoughts and feelings, and ways of living and creating common beliefs. And in this respect, I think we must also introduce different forms of mass media, newspaper, magazines, radio, television, internet and mobile phones, social media and so on, which create, again, their own technological possibilities which were not available, let's say, to newspapers, what is available, let's say, now to mass media. I could go on this, but the time doesn't permit me. Maybe in the discussion one could come to the newer forms of mass media and what kind of possibilities or perversions they offer. But I must now turn the argument around and say that if this is so, that religion in the Western world in many ways has become mass media, then I must ask myself what's happening in a country like India. And the answer to that will be in many ways something similar to what's happening, with a difference that mass media in many ways becomes the vehicle of religion, because we have television channels in the country which are 24 hours running with religious themes. And in this respect, and some of these people, the gurus of Indian scene, are not some of the people that I particularly respect. But there is also another side to it. Hinduism is based not on one text like Bible or Quran. Hinduism is based on mythology, where texts like a Ramayana and Mahabharata, these major epics, are part of the living reality of many Hindus. And in a very strange way, Ramayana and Mahabharata, these two texts were brought to younger generation through the medium of television. The entire country would more or less stop functioning when these two epics were serialized over TV. So religion, mass media becoming a form of religion is true in a sense, but also in another sense, mass media as a vehicle of a religious text is also true. But I would like to draw, and that's my concluding comment, at your attention to the following. Religion doesn't only bind, it also blinds, as we know. And in that respect, mass media, I think, performs the role of binding and blinding in rather blinding manner. And I think we need to be cautious about this, to what extent we are being blinded by the surfeit of images in front of us. Seeing is believing, but believe me, seeing should not be believed. We need to exercise our critical faculty and ask ourselves to what extent the images that are projected before us are reality. And I would like to go to, in this respect, to William James, an American philosopher. I went to French sociologist, American philosopher and psychologist, who talked about, in the varieties of religious experiences, that religion is about feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, in relation to what they consider the divine. Divine for him means anything that is godlike. And I would say that in many ways, Asian religions of Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, relate to this experience of realizing the God within. And for that, I think binding and blinding is not the only definition of religion. Now, what concept of religion will prevail, that is for us to see. And how will that concept be realized, that is for us to see. Will it be the group dance around a totem pole or in individual solitude? Thank you.
Very nice.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a different point of view on the subject, for the binding and blinding, and also for the information. You have religious channels going on 24 hours a day? More than one?
Yes, more than one, and they carry titles like Astha, which would mean having faith. But there are fortunately, more than one or two such channels in India, and there are also song and dance channels which run 24 hours, Bollywood.
Well, thank you. We'll talk about some of this later. Our third panelist, Nico Carpentier, who sort of has dual citizenship in a way, right? He is an associate professor at the Communications Studies Department of the Free University at Brussels, and he is also a lecturer at the Charles University in Prague. When I first heard about Mr. Carpentier, I thought of him only in Brussels, and then I realized he's known here as well. He is vice president of the European Communication Research and Educational Association, and also holds offices in other similar societies. It's sort of interesting that you're coming to speak now after Professor Munshi, because your theoretical focus is on discourse theory, and with interests situated in the relationship between media, journalism, politics, culture, especially towards social domains as war and conflict, ideology, participation, and democracy. Here are some titles of his articles and books. Media in Movement, 22 journalistic experiments to enhance citizen participation. Another one, The Ungraspable Audience. Another one, Culture, Trauma, and Conflict, Cultural Studies Perspectives on Contemporary War. Here's one that sort of struck me as a link to what we heard from Surendra, Understanding Alternative Media, Discourse Theory and Cultural Analysis, Media, Arts, and Literature, and then one that I really don't understand at all, Trans-Reality Television, the transgression of reality, genre, politics, and audience. So you're on to do some connecting for us.
Okay, thank you very much for the slightly mysterious last part of the introduction and the very kind introduction and invitation. I enjoyed listening to the mini keynote, and of course, already being one of the last speakers, you always end up with the problem of repeating, I think, quite a number of things that have been said. As a media studies scholar, I always find myself in the very bizarre situation that, on the one hand, I have to stress the importance of media, but at the same time, I also have to add that they are not that important, which is, of course, going against my profession. But you'll bear with me. I'll try to work with exactly this tension. There are many approaches to this topic, and in the debate we already saw quite a few. There is the idea of media as a religion. There's the idea of the mediations of religion, how it's actually been broadcast, how it's being presented to us. And there's also the issue of religious media. And I think that we're already in the debate working in that rather complicated field. But I want to, in a way, come back to the idea of media as religion and try to connect it to the main focus of this meeting, media and democracy. And I think my starting point is that at some stage, at least in history, religion and its institutionalized form took a crucial hegemonic position. And I think in contemporary societies, it has lost that privileged position. But what we've, I think, also seen in contemporary societies, and this is very much the metaphor developed by Claude Lefort, this idea that there is an empty seat of power. There is no privileged institution that can hold this one position in society. What we see is a societal struggle for domination, for ideological domination in many cases. But at the same time, we do see this multitude of spheres. There's not one dominant sphere. But, and that's another sort of addition, we do see specific spheres that have very, very strong claims to become that dominant center in society. And there is a wonderful metaphor developed by, to turn to the media, developed by Nico. And he writes about the myth of the mediated center. And the myth of the mediated center is the idea that, first of all, there is a center in society, and secondly, that the media actually take that place. But he's very explicit in calling that a myth, calling that actually a strategy to emphasize mass media's importance. Media contribute themselves to this myth. They do so in very strange ways. They do so by, for instance, creating liveness, by giving us the idea that we have direct access to reality, that they are showing us the real. They do so by organizing self-disclosure so that we can get direct access to the psyche of the other. Think about talk shows. Think about all these emotional outbursts we often see in talk shows. And this is the idea that media can play that role. But this is, in a way, it's a myth. And in many different ways, I would argue that it's a very problematic myth, where media claim to be the only institution playing that role. I would disagree with the idea that they actually can perform that role. I think there are many different institutions still struggling for that position, but they certainly have the claim to be doing so, and in many cases, I must admit that they do so. And then if we turn to the idea of media and democracy, I think that we need to evaluate that position that media try to take, being a sacral space, because, of course, the myth of the mediated center is having a claim to sacrality and pushing out the profane. If we look, for instance, at talk show participants, ordinary people entering the media, they feel privileged to enter this sacred space and to be part of this media system of the generation of meaning. And I think that if we want to think about a more, I think, nuanced and democratic role for mainstream media, we have to actually look at the way that they organize this claim towards the sacral. And I think that here the notion of democracy plays a key role, because we need to democratize these sacral spaces, allowing them to function, because I think there is a very strong need for togetherness. There is a very strong need for the integration, for social integration, as has been mentioned. There's a very, very strong need to, at some stages, to suspend the ordinary, which is, I think, what the sacral does. It's, we need the aesthetics of the magical, in a way. These are very, very significant societal functions. We need the transgression, and here comes my title from that famous book you mentioned. We need the transgression of the ordinary by the ordinary. Yeah. And I think these are very, very substantial roles that, for instance, mainstream media can play, but not exclusively. But at the same time, we need to curb these claims. We need to avoid that they become more than that they should become. And we need to, I think, avoid that they introduce very significant power imbalances, positioning themselves as the only one, as a post-political system that goes uncontested and that has full access to the real, making the ordinary insignificant again. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is one of the problems of mainstream media as a religion. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I thank you so much for the clarification. Thank you. We have a final speaker, Tomáš Sedláček, born in Czechoslovakia, but with residences as a child in Finland and Denmark. Tomáš Sedláček was invited at the age of 24 to become an economic advisor to President Václav Havel in the year 2001, and it was an invitation he accepted. In 2006, during studies at Yale University, he was listed in the Yale Economic Review as one of the 5 hot minds in economics. He is currently, I don't know if this is still true because I researched you, but I don't know that it's that up to date. Are you still the chief macroeconomic strategist?
I have to ask my boss.
Oh, but as of this morning, it was safe.
As of this morning, I was still fine. Yeah.
At Českoslovakia Obchodní banka, and a lecturer at Charles University. He is that as well. He is also the author of a book called, I'm going to give you the full title, the title and the subtitle, The Economics of Good and Evil, The Quest for Economic Meaning from Gilgamesh to Wall Street, which was a bestseller in the Czech Republic when it was published, but which has also garnered very favorable reviews in its English incarnation published by Oxford University Press, in the Washington Post, the Financial Times of London, among other reviews. Because society originally sought truth from poets, before turning to philosophy and finally to scientists and mathematicians. Sedlacek feels he is on sound ground with his novel methodology of examining revered literary, religious, and philosophical texts from ancient to modern times. That's the foundation of this book, which I just learned about, but when I went back to my room last night, I pressed the button on Amazon and I'm getting it. Reviewers call his book lively, enlightening, outstanding, and also, these are all quotes, a book that is meant for everyone. So, excite us a little bit about the book and your theory.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to continue where actually you stop, if I may, because I find this quite intriguing. Of course, I'm an economist, and I thought that economics is the religion of our time. So it's kind of interesting, but there's a difference. If you tell to a media person that media is a religion of our time, they usually kind of, oh, don't exaggerate. When you say that to an economist, you are building a religion of our time, they feel insulted. They, oh, I mean, what do you talk about? So there's this sort of a gap. Now, I was always taking media as a vehicle of this religion. Why I lack in media as a religion, it's also interesting that we have the panel media as religion. Therefore, already acknowledging that it isn't really, there is still a religion as religion. We still have to reserve that place for religion as religion. But media as religion is not it, but it can pretend and be like religion. However, what I miss in media, wanting to be religion, I miss the devil, which we have in economics. I miss heaven in religion, again, something that we do have in economics. And the beautiful thing about, and also you talked about, many of you talked about over-exaggeration of this. And this is, I think, exactly what has become the problem with economics. We fetishized it to the point of becoming an idol. And this fetishizing can happen with good things. I just would argue that today, the role of fetish is economics. 100 years ago in Europe, we fetishized the idea of notion. And the fetish is something that promises you the road to salvation and yet stands in your way, like money. And here I would like to continue where you said it unites, but yet it divides. I mean, the whole idea of specialized society is that there is a distance between you and the object of your desire. So if you want water, for example, it is not at hand, it is your whole institution has to be employed, and the further the distance, the more richer the society is, and the more institutions you need to bridge the gap which it itself created. I would even go as far as to say that what Jesus had, the bone Jesus had to pick with Pharisees was, you fetishized ethics, making it a dead, irrelevant, soulless, something that was supposed to serve man, but then now it is men are serving it. You know, the Shabbat isn't, I mean, the Shabbat is here for man, not the man for Shabbat. And really the complaints that Jesus has against the Pharisees, you know, doesn't have a soul, it's an empty system of rules that don't even make sense, they're full of paradoxes, they are really promising a way to God, but yet they are the stumbling block on the way to God because nobody is good enough. This is sort of exactly what you hear today towards economics. Created a system that doesn't, you know, drive us, we're not in control, we don't understand, it has a life of its own, it's promising us the way to this promised land, yet it is standing in the way because we're not economic enough. You know, so the rhetoric of Pharisees is you're not ethical enough, you're not national enough 100 years ago. Now, what is the problem? What brought us into the trouble? Economics. What shall bring us out of the trouble? Even more economics. And this is I think, one characteristic of fetish. It also doesn't work if you don't believe it, like religion. Money, for example, to take Zimmel or others who make this point, it only works if you believe it. So the magic is in the magic itself. Now, what believes in economics, and pretty much I would even argue in the modern society, is something that I call not lost in translation, but found in translation. I would argue that our beliefs have moved into language. There's no need to, credit means believe, and debit means debt means guilt or sin in the original New Testament Greek. So the Lord's Prayer. This is the prayer that you heard from Wall Street people. Forgive us our debts, as we do not forgive those who are indebted to us. And the whole debate about Greece today, I would argue, is it looks economic on the upfront, but in fact it's a continuation of the theological debate, law versus grace. Should we forgive, should we treat Greece according to the law? You signed it, you owe us. Or should we forgive them? If so, how many times? Should I forgive them 7 times or 77 times? So again, the facade here is technical. We have numbers just to confuse everybody and to get rid of theologians and other sociologists. So we keep the discourse to ourselves. And once discourse, you hear things like justice, lazy, don't deserve, etc., etc. So I will close here, and I'm looking forward for the debate.
Very good.
Is anybody ready? Thomas Halik's ready to respond to all the people who have responded to him.
Yeah, thank you all for all this inspiring and enriching remarks and answers. Just a few remarks. Perhaps I'm very thank you for this mentioning the care of the soul, which is the Platonic idea, which was the very important idea of Jan Patočka. For Jan Patočka, the spiritual substance of Europe is the care of the soul, and for Havel and for the dissident intellectuals in Prague, it was a political program. Another point, you mentioned this idolatry and so on. I think it's a very important part of religion, especially the tradition of the faith based by the biblical concept. In Judaism and Christianity, this desacralization of power, this iconoclastic tradition. There are many scholars, they think that the beginning of secularization is in the Hebrew Bible, when in Exodus, for example, Moses said to Pharaoh, who was the son of God, let my people go. So, and there is the prophetical tradition in religion, which is always the desacralization of power. The prophets are always saying to the people of power, you are not gods, you are just men. It was the Nathan to David, and all the tradition of the martyrs in Christianity, the confrontation of the martyrs, the confrontation with the power, with the totalitarian power, from the old Roman time to the contemporary totalitarian regimes, it was this tradition of desacralization of power. To colleague Munshi, I remember my discussions with the former ambassador of India in Prague. He came from Calcutta, and everybody who was in Calcutta knows that Calcutta is always crowded by so many people. And he told me that he returned regularly to Calcutta from Prague at Sunday morning, and Calcutta's streets were empty because there was a very famous TV serial about the Indian mythology, and all people were sitting in front of the screen. But what is more important and interesting, that almost all actors, they played the gods were running for parliament, and they were elected.
Not all.
Not all.
We have other actors in parliament.
We have some bad actors.
Yes, we have very
other actors.
But it's also an example of this presence of religion in media. To colleague Carpentier, I think it's very interesting, this role of the soap opera, of the TV serials in contemporary culture. For many people, is their own life banal, and they live practically the life of these heroes of the soap opera. They are not taken seriously their own life, but watching these TV soap operas, it's a sort of mystical participation of the on the life of the others. It's also the expression of Durkheim, this mystical participation. So they are living instead of their own authentic life, the artificial, virtual life of these heroes, of these rich people, and so on. And to Tomáš, yes, it's a great topic, this theology of capitalism, and this debt and forgiveness. There are some expressions in German which are not perhaps able to translate. This vergelt Gott could be transformed in forgot Geld. This it's not possible to, to translate it, but this deification of the money, this this monetization, also the iconography of bankovek, of the notes, you know, in God we trust, and all. It is so interesting example for what is sacred for the different nations. This notes. So the iconography of Geld and many other things. So it was just
no.
Thank you for that, Roger. I wonder if you have anything to add.
Well, I've got a few thoughts today. I was intrigued by Tomáš Sedláček's theory of fetishism, because I think this touches on really what the fundamental issue about the media, the idea that the fetish, which is presented as the means to God, becomes an obstacle to God, and that is of course the age-old biblical criticism of idolatry, and that does connect with what Tomáš Halík has just said about the desacralization of power, that real religion has the desacralization of these things as its ultimate goal. That we're constantly creating false ideas of the sacred, which have to be torn down if we are to confront what is true in ourselves. And I think this, Nico Carpentier said something very important about the sacred space of the talk show. The people enter that space thinking that they themselves have been transfigured to become the idol that they had previously been worshipping. And instead of seeing that the depth of their own self-deception, they go away with a certain measure of self-satisfaction from this. To what extent should we be asking them to confront the real question as to whether this is a sacred space or not, and if so, what makes it so? And I think all human beings are weak and easily taken in by themselves, and there are times when they can't take themselves in. when they're confronted by the person they love and are accused, for instance, and when they're confronted by themselves and accused. And the whole point of that prayer, the Lord's Prayer, the request for forgiveness on condition that you offer it, that is really the essence of real religion, to break through all this substitute sacralization and confront the truth about yourself in relation to the divine. So, I think that the media, this phony sacralization, is something that we should be fighting against. But of course, how can we fight against it without the use of the media? That's a
very good point.
Yeah, very briefly, and I must also respond to this fetish idea. But before that, very briefly, I share your concern that medium and its content, but in many ways, medium is message. As McLuhan said it famously, and I think the more empty it is, the more strong message it gives. Yeah. And that is why, even though I sounded frivolous, but I meant seriously the binding and blinding effect of media in terms of creating images. When you see that there is so much information, but in effect nothing. But coming to this fetish, you see, fetish, and I think it's a very strong idea which we need to pursue. Fetish basically means an inanimate object worshipped for its supposed magical powers, or because it is considered to be inhabited by spirit. Yeah. And because of this, it becomes alive, and then whether it delivers or not is something to be seen, and then we shift from one fetish to the other. But there is another sense of fetish which we shouldn't overlook, namely a form of sexual desire in which gratification is linked to an abnormal degree to a particular object, item of clothing, part of the body, and so on. I understand the Victorian men developed fetishes focusing on feet, shoes, and boots. That fetish one can see even now alive. The reason why I have gone to this dimension of fetish, I think media, in certain ways, created a fetish of sexual desire, explicitly or not so explicitly, and therefore working on multiple levels of fetish, both sacred fetish and sexual gratification fetish. Thank you.
Yes.
That I think this is, if I may, you can even see this in many, I call this object-subject reversal. If you fetishize it, an object-subject reversal happens, and from a puppeteer, you get a puppet. Kundera writes about this constantly. A man starts a game of, let's say, sexual nature with a woman. The game gets alive, sort of, and of course it's an inanimate object, but because he focuses on it so much. And the game, as if, starts playing the original play. And you hear this in the markets today. What are the, money talks. What are the numbers saying? They even have a, markets even have a spokesperson. They're called the rating agencies. This is what Sarkozy has been complaining. Our degrees of freedom are nil because the rating agencies are dictating what to do. We have become, ineffectively, the slaves of debt, the slaves of sin. We even call it, in professional economic terminology, the money we have to pay for debt, it's called debt service. So we are literally, we even call it debt servitude. And of course in Greek the word debt and sin are synonyms. So even if you read on a Sunday Eve morning your Financial Times, with little bit of hint, you're reading the gospel. The Greeks have fallen under the weight of their sins, debts. They can no longer carry them. They were too large for them. They needed a redeemer. Somebody with higher faith, credit, to take their debts on his shoulders and to bury them in his or her stead. And the problem with Greece is that we don't know if it's a market or a family. This is in a sort of a barbarian sense. Are they it or are they thou? And there are different rules that work on the level of family or friends. There we don't have market rules. My argument here is that the above level, above economics, when Greece goes bankrupt, the rules of logic are more similar to the... And that's why, and this I think is the main point of religion. I think the way you defined it, all of you, none of you talked about, we did talk, religion is something that I think misses the soul. It sort of very easily becomes rules, something that we can acquire, but the life is Life is elsewhere. And I think that's why Jesus so often talks about love, grace, mercy, and that's why his parables are really, based on a whole idea of paradox. It works differently in the kingdom. And my last point is this, the spirit. We have spirits in economics. They're called animal spirits. It's a basic of the triangle of belief of every decent economist. You have to believe in the invisible hand of the market, the unorchestrated orchestrator. We always believed in some sort of divine orchestration, and now we believe in unorchestrated, orchestrated. The motto of the invisible hand is laissez-passer. Don't touch it. Don't meddle with it. It will orchestrate you. You must not orchestrate it. You must sort of do a Kierkegaardian leap of faith and trust the markets into. And the object, why not think of Lacanian object petit a?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think you control it, Aladdin's land, Gollum of Prague, the Ring of Power in Lord of the Rings, that nobody owns it, it has a will of its own.
Yeah.
And the markets have a will of their own to which we now must subdue because we've maneuvered ourselves into a position where we've become slaves.
Yes.
It seems though that one of the principal needs that religions meet is our need to live together in communities in harmony, despite our deeply rooted selfish and violent impulses. Does economics do that? Does the media do that?
If
we're talking about the media as a religion, does it meet that need?
Well, I think that one of the things we need to, for a second at least, deconstruct is this notion of the media, because there's a wide variety of mediated practices, and mainstream media are just one of the many fields of mediation, how we give meaning to things. So I think we need to be a bit careful with making that very strong claim about the media. And to come back to this notion of desacralization, I think that democracy is always a combination of sacralization and desacralization. There is always a struggle going on between these two components, and you see that within religion itself, but you also see that within the media itself. And there are resistant movements, there are contestations. We see that within the media itself. There is something like participatory media, community media, alternative media. There are now on the internet new sort of communities that are organizing things in a very, very different way. And so if we talk about the media, we tend to forget them. And I think what is happening in a wide variety of slightly invisible areas is a totally different kind of logics, which is much more participatory, which is desacralizing traditional media power. And I think these are areas where we need to pay attention to and that we need to cherish much more.
Right. Good point. You're going to say something?
Well, just one point that perhaps is worth mentioning, that the concept of the sacred is connected with that of sacrifice. Sacrificial moments are very important in real religion. These don't often occur with the media, but when they do, they are quite astonishing. If you think of the death of Princess Diana, she was a media creation. She was only significant because she appeared on television in all sorts of ways and in gossip columns and all the rest. She had been promoted to something slightly more than a human being. She was also a representative of every ordinary person's desire to be transfigured by the throne. And then suddenly she's done to death in a terrible accident. There was overwhelming national grief. People putting flowers outside Kensington Palace for days. And you had a sense that really she was being treated as a sacrificial victim, standing for all the frustrations of the people. And there you had something much nearer, I think, to real religion, being born out of a media-created goddess. But it didn't last. Nothing in the media lasts, whereas Christianity has lasted for 2,000 years. No, who knows what the next stage is.
What was the most important ritual surrounding Diana?
Surrounding
the funeral.
It was the sacrificial death itself, pursued into a tunnel by screaming motorcycles. Mm-hmm. That is something out of a Jean Cocteau film, you know? That was the sacrificial moment. Yeah.
You hear this in economics again. My sort of fetish is taking the words that we read in the newspapers literally. So the question is, what sort of budget cuts shall we do to win the favor of gods of growth back? Who shall we sacrifice? Should we sacrifice the Greeks? Will that be enough? Should we sacrifice the poor? Should we tax the rich? How shall we do this? I have maybe one, if I may, because there's a lot of sociologists here, and this I think where maybe connects the topic. Let me put, Hauserwas, a theologian, and Ivan Ilyich's idea that what is happening in our society, and you see this in economics as well, but mainly we sort of vomited, but not in the bad meaning of the word, but externalized is too weak. Something between externalized and vomited. Our our morals into institutions. Today we don't have to care for the old because we have the pension insurance. And we don't have to pay for the poor or for the sick because we have social and healthcare insurance. So this brings this whole question of Patočka's care for the soul. If ethics even has been externalized and even religious ethics have changed because this part of being social is something to take care of the widow and all that, which has been a huge part of religion in the old time. Now this is a responsibility of an institution. The fundamental question is, does the soul abide in these religions called institutions? Is there a soul? Which brings a very difficult question of, can institutions actually carry moral expectations? And if so, which I think so, do they also carry moral blame? This is why we have responded against institutions in this crisis, not against gods primarily, but here, but the complaint, the story is the chain, the ending is the same, the story you can change.
A quick comment here?
Quick, so we could
Very
ask
short, yes,
the
of course,
audience.
I'm aware. I think in terms of sacrifice and in terms of the comment he made, sacrifice greed, and that no media will tell you. I think that only religions of the world will tell you.
Yeah, did we fetishize it?
We have time for a few questions from you. So if you have a question ready and you raise your hand, there's a question ready. Could identify yourself, please.
We lost the media.
Hello? There we go. Hello, my name is Jake Rollison. I'm a graduate student in media studies. So today we've talked about idolatry, which we've said is sort of the worship of our own creation, something which we control, in a way we mediate. And then Roger, I believe you said you view today's sort of media as a false sacralization, something maybe we have to, and you said, how do we overcome it, except through media? It seemed, in terms of a larger theological perspective, it seems like we're talking the dialogue between immanence and transcendence. And we've also kind of said, specifically you, Professor Munshi, we've discussed the idea of the divine as something that so far our discussions have been relatively obscure. And in some ways it seems, we've said, oh, the divine is something that we attribute value to, which again seems within the logic to me of idolatry. And I guess this sort of points back to the idea of the need for God or transcendence in general. And I guess my question is sort of, do we have this transcendence? Is there I guess I'm kind of trying to unveil the tension I'm kind of feeling between Professor Scruton and Professor Munshi. Do we have a transcendence that we can dialogue with? Or are we just sort of providing a need, trying to meet our own need for transcendence through the media?
Oh, very nice.
You want to? I can comment, but after you, perhaps?
Well, just a very brief remark. I think that's a very good question.
Yes.
And it's a well-known problem for all religions that the transcendent cannot be expressed directly in terms of the immanent. And the danger, therefore, is you become lost in the immanent and lost in the representations in this world without breaking through to that other world where you truly belong. How to enter into dialogue with that other world is what real religion is about. That's why I referred to the care of the soul. You have to have trust that you can have that dialogue, but it's not a dialogue that you can achieve simply like that without the aid of a tradition, and without the aid of sacred texts, and without the aid of ritual and the kind of serene practice that puts you into the presence of the Almighty. And I think...
Should I?
Professor Munshi, yeah.
Very briefly, I quite entirely agree with this, and I would just supplement with one comment. Religion gives, of course, this dimension that has been highlighted, but it also gives another dimension, which can be part of this world, namely Christian love, Buddhist compassion, and Hindu sense of being still. There is something to this. I think all these three, and one can make a bigger list, all these three belong to this world. Actually, not just to this world, to our immediate problems of the debt crisis in Europe, if we can apply it.
No, precisely.
We'll take one more question. You got it.
That's a very good one.
Tomáš Císař, architect. I would thank you, Carpentier, for the mention about the sacred space in the media. And my point of the question is that the sacred space in the religion was represented always in the history by a temple, a church. It was a whole mediatheque. The religion was the media. Wouldn't be the panel discussion for 1,000 religion as a media,
2,000.
maybe, or 1,000. 1,000, that will be a little bit reverse team. Not media as a religion, but religion as a media. Is it that the problem is that this kind of permanent transition from religion and the media and this tension, isn't it this kind of problem we are discussing? Thank you.
Good idea.
There's a very, actually, there's a very relevant book that all Czechs should know called Tvář baroka by Zdeněk Kalista, which appeals directly to what an architect should think about, at least the religion that's manifest around you here in Prague. You know that in the Baroque style, the eternal is made immanent and the immanent is made eternal, and that here is the point of intersection of the timeless with time, as T.S. Eliot put it. And Kalista does a beautiful job in explaining why it is that here in the center of Europe this manifestation occurred. So he would be quite agree with you that in the end, if you get the media right, the religion and the medium are identical. Yeah. But you've got to get it right, and there's a lot of hard work that went in developing the Baroque church from the primitive temple.
Yeah. Okay. May I just add to this? I was just in Frankfurt giving a talk to ECB. This was 2 weeks ago when they just finished their new building, and on that week, consequently, they became the lender of last resort, and I was supposed to give a speech to them. You could not notice the similarity between the church and the new ECB building that was standing right next to it. Only the ECB was a little larger, a little taller, a modern ziggurat. And I also told them, you know, ECB has now become the lender of last resort, which means that you have become the believer of last resort. When nobody else believes, you must, in our stead, ostensibly believe. In Czech, it's even nicer. Věřitel poslední instance. There you see the faither, the believer. We even use that in economic language. And if I may have one more comment to the gentleman before, I thought it was very interesting. Did you grow up in the city? No. For those of us who have grown up in the city, we have never seen anything real and authentic that wasn't a product of human civilization in our life. Everything you see around you is a product of some institution. Even the tree in the park is there because some social engineer decided to put it there. So I understand that yawning and yearning for the real, the soul, because we live in an artificially constructed world by mankind. And there is a sort of a backfire, which you see even in the creation. You know, God's created human beings, something goes wrong, they backfire him, maneuvering him effectively into the position that he has to sacrifice himself to save the situation. The situation is replayed. Human beings create institution, economics, culture, art, technology, most commonly. That technology backfires. And again, we need to sacrifice the fetish in order to get things right. And these fetishes are often sacrificed. I mean, the son of Abraham and other fetishes, this is not a very good thing. Or the ring of Polycrates, again, there the fetish needed to be sacrificed. And the Lord of the Rings also. The ring was too powerful. It was too powerful an id machine. It fulfilled all your dreams, like the economy is promising. It had to be defetishized, in this case, destroyed.
This was a very, very exciting panel, wasn't it? And it reminds me, and I mentioned this to some of the leaders of Forum 2000 yesterday, that in the introduction in this book that we have, Mr. Sasakawa welcomed everybody here, and he mentioned 3 times in this very short introduction the spiritual leadership, the spiritual experience, the fundamental spirit of Václav Havel. And I think it's something we have to return to. We haven't finished this conversation. And there are several threads here that really we need to sew together and unravel and sew together again and see where we go with them. So I thank this wonderful panel. I know you do too.
Thank you.
A round of applause. And we also thank you. We thank you for your attentiveness and what you generate here, the spirit that you generate for us. So thank you very much for being with us.